Have you neglected to ever pick apart the different levels of the way that you think, or the way that you argue, or the way that you converse? Well, we're going to fix that. We're going to think about it.
For a bus at the end of the night, under street lamp, bed face flamed by the light.
I've got a few ideas today that probably go in the the special category.
Geometry, numbers, symbolism.
So I'm going to go over a couple things that I call the 3 rules of 3. So, we got 1 rule of 2 and a rule of 3. And yeah, we're going to go in that order of 1, 2, 3, even though when I was an astute 8-year-old philosopher, I found that when you write the numbers 1, 2, and 3 in a row, there will always be one arrow pointed left or right that'll hit the numbers in order, because they're all adjacent. Yes, you needed to hear that. These 3 rules are 3 steps on what we call the ladder of abstraction, which it is exactly what it's called, but we might need a little bit of extra explanation as to what it means. When you're at the base level, you are very direct and human. If your thoughts are not abstract at all, you are very present. Your actions are based on your senses, all regular stuff. But increasing levels on the ladder of abstraction is just when you start thinking more abstractly. Sometimes that means considering what other people think, or imagining how they feel, or using analogies, symbolism, metaphoric truths, or things like art and poetry. Mathematics gets gradually more abstract as you learn more. At the beginning, you have a lot to talk about apples, but you can't exactly ask a child to graph the imaginary root of the ratio between the angles formed by 2 apples out of 3 that you spilled on the floor on the imaginary plane. Part of the reason we call it a ladder is because of what happens when 2 people speaking to each other are on different rungs. When someone is contemplating the civilizational forces bringing conflicts to fruition, they might sound a little insane to someone who doesn't think about things like that. When someone says the national energies require revitalization, you might go looking for batteries behind the American flag, but they're trying to speak larger truth in smaller words. Even so, this idea of the ladder of abstraction might be a hoax, because to a certain extent, the higher levels of abstraction in human thought is just an aggregation of lower levels of information. It might be merited to say that we are stuck at the first rung and only pretend to reach higher. However, this is a worldview that I think is dangerous and unfounded, because I believe we have all experienced information of higher abstraction, love and morality, for example. A worldview that doesn't consider those things as real or doesn't consider them different from any other thing, for example, considering them a process in the brain, props no barriers against tyranny and unlimited social engineering. That is why I rail against it so often. On to the first rule. The rule of 1 is that there is only one truth. It is related to the law of non-contradiction, where 2 contradicting things cannot be logically true at the same time. The rule of 1 dictates that there is one way, one truth, and one. There is one objective right, and anything other than it is wrong. Humans very long ago understood this, but misapplied it. They had the instinct to know that truth exists, but held it too close to themselves, making it effectively subjective. Religions based solely on the rule of 1 would be sun worshippers and pagans. The rule of 1 recognizes authority and survival. It is base and effective because it is founded on these human instincts. The nature of these ideals dictates a theology of higher beings that are not so unlike man. They have hierarchy, carnal pleasures and desires, wants and needs, realms and principalities. When it boils down to it, it is a simple, straightforward rule, one that is most based on human instincts from a survival standpoint. It also produced societies that were mostly based on survival. The rule of 2 is easily understood as the yin and the yang, the male and the female. However, it is also heaven and earth, left and right, reason and emotion. It applies to many things, but is different in the way it considers motion, time, relations between different entities, etc. 2 things twisted around each other. 2 theses to a synthesis. But it is not always competition that leads to the binding of the opposites. Often in the best, it is compliance. This rule is found in higher contemplations on nature, and that is why it is so widely understood across antiquated but still civilizational cultures, those of the Axial Age, which was a revolutionary period in thought. Dualism is a surviving idea because it allows people to understand the world around them. It lets you grapple with motion more than the rule of 1. It helps you to understand why you're not getting your way, or helps you to predict the future. Zoroastrianism and Taoism are dualistic religions. The rule of two is also present in Christianity, but not in the way of good and evil. Christianity's good is a rule of one situation. There is one good that is either present or not present. There is no counterpart in the same category to good. Evil is a corrupting, decaying force. Think of it as committing a crime. You're not propping up a separate system of laws in the same category, you're just not following the law. Duality to Christianity speaks to the natural world, like we talked about, heaven and earth, male and female. The rule of two is fulfilled when the two opposites are in balance, either through harmony or competition. This also applies to personal attributes, where balance is something actively promoted by Christian thought. Don't be quick to anger or complacent in suffering. Be responsible and mature, but childlike in demeanor. Try your absolute best in everything you do, but never worry about the result. The poem If by Rudyard Kipling, yes, I'm bringing it up again, is an example of the rule of two. A phrase that appears repeatedly all throughout the Pentateuch and other places in the Old Testament is, "Do not turn aside either to the right hand or the left." This phrase merges the rule of two and the rule of one into a cohesive unit that carries truth better than either rule. It portrays one path and recognizes a human with tendencies in one direction as well as another, but directs the person to run it right down the middle, between the right and left hands. Notice now that these are two rules merging into one greater truth, and that creates a loop of this meaning, because again, it's the rule of two and the rule of one being two and one. This repeating relationship is because one builds on the other. But what's 1 plus 2? There is one worldview that has been revealed that encapsulates the rule of three. Human thought was playing on easy mode until we were shown the rule of three. Then, things really picked up ever since. This is the way to understand complex systems. If 1 and 2 was the difference between a dot and a line, this is the difference between a line and a polygon. For our geometric thinkers. 3 is a very significant number for seemingly no reason, but it carries a lot of weight. You count to 3 before you throw your kids in them. You make 3 points in rhetoric. You provide a third example when you're trying to explain something. Trying to explain the significance in a way other than,
"It's the Trinity. Bow before it."
might be by highlighting 2 characteristics about these numbers. The number 1 is a singular odd number, the number 2 is a multiple even number, and the number 3 is a multiple odd number. Those are 2 binary characteristics, and past these 3 numbers, there's no new combinations of those characteristics. We often like odd numbers because they are conclusive and solid, and even numbers because they are gentle and cooperative. Or is that just me? 1 is solid, 2 is relational and more complex, and 3 has both characteristics. 3 is where you have complex systems that work and self-repair. We've been doing some historical examples, so that's where we'll direct this one. In review, again, a rule of one society would be like ancient Babylon, Egypt, or Indus Valley civilizations. Things really just depended on the group who controlled the irrigation and the army. Expanding to 2, many Muslim nations, whose more complex cultures facilitated a balance between the warrior and priest estates, introducing a balancing game between the two that has woven their history. Another example, Tsarist Russia, where the Tsar was an estate in and of himself, or herself, Miss Catherine, and the rest of the nobility were the only other incentive group with power to speak of. A three-estate system is the masterpiece of the Western world. The 3 estates that came to steer Western civilization were the nobility, which included knights, lords, monarchs, the priests, and the third rising estate was merchants and entrepreneurs. In societies all around the world, the entrepreneurial moneymakers tried to break through into power, but were beaten down by envy. The difference here was not that the merchants were simply more able to fight for power, it was that the priests and nobles were held to a standard that did not allow envy, and thus allowed those who were competitive their natural place. Additionally, consider that in the formation of the 3-estate system, the merchants did not replace one of the 2 estates because they were also in the framework that did not allow envy and had the fullest concept of fairness. All that to say, it was a more complex and competitive system and increased the ingenuity of each of the classes individually. It is a myth spawned from the French Revolution and modernism that medieval kings were absolute monarchs and every one of them was a tyrant. Governments were small, and the power was dispersed. I will spare you the talk about the US government because you already know exactly what I want to say there. Using the number 3 in application to human power structures is a matter of balancing incentives. Back to our geometric thinkers here. To break a system with 2 incentive groups, you merely have to apply pressure to the middle and they break apart. But although the middle between the 2 points of a triangle is the most vulnerable point, it is stronger than a line, and even if that section sunders, the nearest 2 points are still connected by the third. This whole thing has been a trailing, spiraling mess of inconclusive thought. It's at least partly by design. I thought I might hand out more seeds of thought than sprouted plants. Regardless, let's start wrapping up where we began. From what I've said and from what you've thought while I've been saying, what do these 3 mean to you? You get an automatic F if you don't verbalize it at the screen. The rule of 1. Yes, very true. Good thoughts, good thoughts. The rule of 2. Very thoughtful. Very thoughtful. The rule of 3. Huh. Oh yeah, you've really got that one down to a T. The ladder of abstraction. I see what you're saying, but I'll give a prompter for a little further thought. Is it possible for someone to say words on several levels at once? What would it look like, and who do you think has done such a thing? Hint. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. Just kidding. Here's where I go off the script, because I had a little bit more to say that I was thinking about. So, one of these is a binary, one of these is a gradient, and the other is a spectrum. Just think about it. When your thinking gets more and more abstract, the simplest you can get is a binary. It is yes or no. And then beyond that, you have a gradient. It's not superior to a binary, but it's just different and more complex. And we have to keep that in consideration. And on a spectrum, you can be left, right, up, down, what have you. Just thinking about those different concepts of truth makes you wonder a little bit more. Now, when you're talking about something as true, I think you can only be okay with it being a binary because it's true or false. Something can't be more true or more false. They can be more or less of some quality on a gradient, and you can track multiple qualities or variables on a spectrum, but truth can only be a binary. But you can also use the more complex gradients or spectrums in a situation where you don't have the privilege of the simplicity of the binary. All that to say, you need to have prudence at what level you're operating at. If you're arguing with somebody, people often play weird, word games that will get you to agree to a more abstract truth and then pigeonhole you into a binary. So think about it. If you're arguing with somebody and they get you to agree to the fact that something is some quality applies to a subject, to place it at some point on a gradient, they will then go through their argument and try to get you to agree to some binary truth about that thing. Now, gradients and spectrums, they can be very descriptive, they can be very helpful, but they don't always give the privilege of simplicity. Ascribing one side or the other in the binary, it's a very powerful thing, and it's very important that you don't have the wrong side of the binary, because there's only 2 options, and it's only ever completely true or completely false. But just knowing what level of truth you're operating at can be very important and very helpful in discussions and thought processes, etc. All of that goes with the ideas that we've been working through in here. Just remember to be wary of what type of claim a sentence might be making or an argument might be making, whether that is on a spectrum, a gradient, or on just a simple binary.